Have you ever let anybody down? Has anybody let you down? I mean, really let you down. And I'm not talking about your boss or your co-workers or your division governor. I'm talking about your best friend. The guy who said he'd be with you through thick and thin, even to death if necessary. Well, Mr. Contest Master, fellow Toastmasters and friends, meet Pete. Pete lived a long time ago, about 2,000 years. He was, how do we say, kind of a hothead. He was impulsive. He was combative. Physically, he was a little overweight, sort of balding. One good thing about Pete is that he threw himself 100% into everything he did. I can really respect that. One not so good thing is he put his foot in his mouth way too much. One time he was out with his buddies and he told them he could walk on water. I mean literally walk on water. They were out in the boat, he got out, and he sunk like a rock. Well, you may have guessed by now that Pete is Saint Pete, the Apostle Peter. And as much as I can relate to these various aspects of Peter's life, I think I can most identify with his behavior the night of Jesus' trial. The trial was held at night in a house with a large courtyard. Now, I have to hand it to Pete. At least he was there in the courtyard. I mean, most of his buddies were back at home watching, I don't know, Chariot NASCAR or something. But all the same, he wasn't real keen on being identified as being with the man on trial. It wasn't a real good thing back then. So he was keeping a kind of a low profile as he walked into the courtyard. It was a cold, crisp night as he walked in. He sat down at the fire that they had built there in the middle of the courtyard. Now, as Peter walked in, I think all the eyes of the courtyard were on him. He didn't exactly look like most Jerusalem residents. He was sort of a good old boy, tough guy fisherman. You ever see that TV show, Deadliest Catch, where they're fishing off the Alaskan coast? I kind of picture Peter as being a lot like the captain of the Time Bandit. So he was a tough guy, but you know, even tough guys like to stay warm. So down at the fire he sat. Sitting next to him was this little servant girl, probably no more than 14 years old. She kind of looked Pete up and down. She thought for a minute, where do I know this guy from? He looks awful familiar. And then she put two and two together. I know you. You were with Jesus. Wow. Pete's cover was blown already. So this was a moment for action. And Pete was a man of action. So he took action. Woman, I don't know who you're talking about. Good job, Pete. Way to step up to the plate. But that apparently satisfied the servant girl. A few minutes later, though, somebody else sat down on the other side. And he looked at him, too. And he said, I know you. You're one of those Galileans. You were with Jesus. Man, I don't know what you're talking about. Strike two. Well, this was okay for a little while, apparently, because he was able to walk into the house. So he walked into the house where the trial was. But as soon as he got in, he was stopped by a third guy. Boy, you're not from around here, are you? You're one of them Galileans, just like Jesus. Here was Peter's big chance. Shortly before this, when Peter was back with the other disciples and Jesus, Peter had sworn to Jesus that he would follow him to jail or even to death if necessary. In fact, in front of all the other disciples, Peter said, all these guys will desert you, but not me. So I think Peter was torn. I think part of him wanted to do the right thing, to step forward and make the big declaration. And part of him just wanted the heck out of Dodge. And so Peter was torn. And I have to say, this is the point in the story where I most identify with Peter. Because he didn't step up to the plate. He didn't get out of there. Man, I don't know what you're talking about. And if I'm lying, may God strike me dead. I think the people kind of backed away from him a little bit. But Jesus was in the room too. And Jesus looked right at him, the Bible says. Now, have you ever done anything really boneheaded? You kind of wish somebody would call you out on it so you can get it out in the open. Well, Jesus did call Peter out on it, but not right then. Right then, Jesus just looked at him. And I don't think he was looking at Peter thinking, man, I knew it. I think he was looking at him with compassion. Compassion because he knew that Peter wasn't the tough guy he pretended to be. That behind there was a scared little boy. Well, that did it for Peter. He ran back outside, and he just sat down, and he started weeping. Not because his cover was blown, but I think because for the first time, he was really noticing that he wasn't the macho guy he pretended to be. He was talking the talk, but not walking the walk. Well, at this point, I would have thought that Jesus would be done with Peter. But fortunately, I would be wrong. Peter and his buddies went back to fishing, and Jesus met them on the shore. Jesus looked at Peter and said, Peter, do you love me? What a question. How's he going to answer this? Lord, you know that I love you. Well, then feed my sheep. Peter, do you love me? Jesus asked that question 3 times. And I think he asked 3 times because he wanted to say to Peter, I know that you denied me 3 times, but I forgive you 30 times 3. Well, all wasn't wonderful for Peter after that. He still had his weaknesses. He was still a hothead. He still stuck his foot in his mouth way too much, and he cared way too much what other people thought about him. But Peter, along with his buddies, James, John, and Paul, were the most influential members of the early church. And we still benefit today from what they did. So what about you? Is there somebody in your life who's let you down? Somebody who you could give a second chance to? The next time somebody lets you down, remember Peter. And remember Jesus' response. 2,000 years later, we're still benefiting, largely because Jesus gave Peter and his buddies a second chance. Give that person in your life a second chance. After all, who knows what the result will be 2,000 years from now? Mr. Toastmaster?